to start things on time. It's probably because I've been in a lot of administrative roles over the course of my career. I'm assuming everybody can hear me okay. If Sterling was able to hear me, so I assume everyone else can. Linda, can you hear me as well?
I can hear you.
All right, great. So if there are any problems, please let me know and I'll try to respond to it. I'm not going to speak for very long. I just want to give you a little bit of input on what happened here. I'd been talking with the JSR people for a while about the possibility of doing something on vulnerability, in this case, consumer vulnerability. If you know my work, you know I spent most of my life working on issues of vulnerability, particularly as they relate to poverty, gender, social class, and race. And it's been a passion of mine. It's kept me working for a very long time. So I'm very appreciative of the field's interest in this. Much of my work is coalesced down to something called consumption adequacy, which looks at those goods and services somebody needs to feel whole within a particular society. No surprise there. But anyway, I wanted to mention that up front. So when we decided to talk about this, I put together a brief outline of a proposal, and I asked my dream team, both Sterling and Linda, to be co-editors with me. The editor of the journal was very excited about this team. I'm very excited about it, and I'm delighted that they have come together and are willing to work with me. Just a couple of quick things. One is that none of us will be involved in any of the papers. So this is something that the journal wants. I don't know if others have been asked, but I've been asked on 2 occasions. And it's obvious that we can't do that because there could be a potential bias. Not that there necessarily is. Sometimes it goes completely out of our hands, but we didn't want to do it. We are going to pen something together though, because we think that this area needs some of our input. So so, so the, the plan, hi, Andrew. The plan is for us to work together to kind of define what the area looks like and then potentially to use the papers that are accepted for this to be able to fill in the details of the direction that the field is going in terms of vulnerability and the direction that we may take later on. Just one final thing, and I think Linda Price is going to take over soon. But the one thing that we have talked about, and this was Linda Price's idea, and it's something that doesn't often come to me, but it did the last time I wrote something for JSR. I wrote something on anti-service from the basis of a prison. And I just wanted to say that what we're really looking for is for people to bring the service literature to the fore as it pertains to consumer vulnerability, not to write a paper on consumer vulnerability and secondarily have it associated with the services. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying. I think Linda can probably make it more tangible for you, but that's the direction that we want to go. Okay, there I have a picture of who I am up there in case people have no idea. And you're welcome to have no idea. My children don't know much about me either. Okay, so let me just say that I'm going to turn this over to Linda Price. She's a friend, an incredible colleague. Or does it go to you? I'm sorry, did I do that wrong, Sterling? You're going to speak next. Sterling, you're speaking next, right?
Yes, thank you. Yes,
Oh,
thank you, Ron. And I'm honored. Hello, everybody. It's so good to see so many new faces, some old friends. We were able to convene a workshop at Frontiers. So I'm seeing some of you again. Welcome to all of you. What an amazing group. We are just flabbergasted by the response that this special issue is receiving. And thank you for being here. Just as Ron shared, this is an issue, a special issue that we're really excited about. I know the Journal of Service Research is as well. This has been my life's calling as a professional, is to engage in work to better society and to be transformative. I know I see many of you from the transformative consumer research community, many of you in the TSR, transformative service research. These types of issues in service and this opportunity in service is not entirely new. But yet this issue needs to really push the frontiers. as it relates to TSR, TCR, and we are honored as guest editors to be able to help shape the field as it relates to this area. I've been very passionate as a service researcher, stemming back from the days that I was a practitioner and working in these spaces, recognizing vulnerability in my context of banking that I've worked a lot in, been very passionate in the financial services arena, looking at the system of financial services and how it lends itself to alleviate disparities, but also a system that exacerbates disparity among disadvantaged and vulnerable consumers. And so, as we look at the very complex service systems, I think it's really important that we take up this question of vulnerability. And we all rely heavily, and humanity relies heavily on services, as we all know. And we're excited for you to get excited about the service and the complexity of service systems and how you can and we can bring together insights to alleviate disparities from improving these systems from a theoretical basis, but also from a very practical and applied basis. And so with that, I'm honored to be a part of the Stream team. It's my opportunity to hand it off to Linda, who's going to walk us through some thoughts that should provoke some questions. Let me just also let you know you're welcome to use chat. We will have time at the end of our presentations to field questions. We're scheduled to be on this for 2 hours. We may only be on for 90 minutes. But really, we wanted to give you the time to ask the questions that you have. You're welcome to send those questions in chat at any time. We may not interrupt or stop the presentation during that time, but I will be keeping note of those questions and making sure that we revisit those questions. And then at the end, we'll have opportunity for you to unmute and ask questions as you so wish. So with that, let me introduce my esteemed friend and colleague, Linda Price. I mentioned at the workshop previously, this is a woman that needs no introduction. The reality is we all are so grateful for Linda and her leadership in so many different areas of our discipline. And Ron and I are really honored that Linda is working together with us on this, because she brings an amazing immense of background and experience and insight that is so valued. So welcome, Linda. Turn it over to you.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here. And I'm just going to mention to everybody that you might want to mute yourself when you're not speaking. And I'm saying that in part because I have a dog. And if you hear my dog in the background, I'll be trying to mute myself too. But first, I'll try to get through this discussion. The other thing I want to mention just as part of this is that when Ron and Sterling and I were kind of planning this webinar, I asked Sterling and Ron how many people they thought would show up. And I think Sterling guessed that maybe 30 or so people would be here. And I'm just noticing that we have a lot more than that. We have 118 so far, which is pretty amazing. And to be honest, if all I'm using is papers, this is the most ever. Eleonora, please mute yourself. Thank you. It's so easy to forget in these Zoom calls. So I'm going to walk you through what we talked about at the Frontiers workshop a little bit. So if you were there, you're going to be bored for a little while because it's not any different than it was at Frontiers. But you will have a chance, I think, all of you to follow up on additional questions. So I'm really glad to have everybody here and everyone participating. And that's my dog, of course. So I really want to emphasize that when we're thinking about, I've been involved less so than Ron and Sterling, but recently for about almost a decade now, I've been really working on an initiative of better marketing for a better world. So really coming from the perspective of how can we do a better job as marketers in really making a better society in many ways. And so I really am hoping to bring to this what I hope to bring to every project, which is rigor, relevance, and responsibility. And I think all three of these R's are really important. We want to be relevant. We want to do that in a rigorous, thoughtful way. And we want to do that in a way that brings our responsibility to the world in a meaningful way. And so, Sterling, I'm just going to cue you and you can keep going. So thanks again for being here. And oh my gosh, I'm so surprised and overwhelmed by the interest in this issue. And I think that if we can help you do a better job of submitting something that will get through, that's what we're really hoping for. And I want to emphasize that it's very hard to write a good journal article. And it's very hard to write a good journal article for a really good journal. And Journal of Services Research, as Ron will later walk you through, is a really impactful and good journal. That said, there's not a page limit. If we had 100 good papers, Ming Wei would publish every single one of them. And so it's not a restriction on how many papers can get in. It's how many good papers are there going to be that are going to really blow this topic into something that everyone is aware of and everyone cares about. So we're going to set the stage, we hope. We're going to help you think through this, but it's ultimately going to depend on you. So one thing that we stressed and that we walked through a lot of time on at the workshop in breakouts is really thinking through very, very carefully. So what? Why are you, what is the big takeaway from what you're doing? What contribution are you making to the theory and practice? What contribution are you making to better the lives of vulnerable, disadvantaged consumers through services? And so I think one of the things we want to emphasize is that unlike a lot of marketing journals, Journal of Services Research is interdisciplinary. So you can take a lot of different perspectives. In fact, Ming Wei comes out of information sciences. And so it's a very interdisciplinary journal. That said, you want to be very specific, and it becomes especially important with an interdisciplinary journal to say what conversation you're joining and what you're contributing to that conversation. So as Ron already sort of foregrounded, this really, making a contribution really has two parts. We're really looking at trying to think about how better services can ameliorate vulnerability and enhance consumer well-being. And I put in marketing because that's kind of my focus, but it's really better services, research and understandings and delivery. So it's design and delivery of services and how that can ameliorate and enhance consumer well-being. So two parts are, is it really a services marketing management problem? Why should service researchers care? What can service researchers do about it? And even if you are doing qualitative research, which many of you might do, you really want to be thinking about concretely, what does it mean for what service design and delivery looks like? What are the interventions? So you may not test those interventions, but you should have an idea about what those interventions might be. And so, of course, many of you come to this because you're passionate about enhancing consumer well-being and understanding vulnerability. So that's the other part. The other part is to think through what is the nature, the temporality, the duration, and the distribution of vulnerability and disadvantage. And I'm going to talk through both of these parts a little bit. So in terms of consumer vulnerability and disadvantage, we really want to think broadly about this. And so we're less interested in you describing or detailing a specific vulnerability. That's not the purpose of this journal. The purpose of this journal is to think about vulnerability and disadvantage contextualized within important disadvantages and vulnerabilities that exist in service marketplaces. So you want to think about what is the nature of that vulnerability and disadvantage. Is it systemic? Is it a structural problem? If so, that has implications for how we study it. Is it temporally distributed? Is it sometimes there and sometimes not there? Is it predictable? Do we know what leads to it and contributes to it? Does it evolve gradually or suddenly? How is it distributed? How is the distribution mediated by services provided? So for example, when that distribution comes in, how do we work to mitigate it? Do we sometimes cause it to be exacerbated? So how are services mobilized under differing conditions and distributions of vulnerability? Those of you who are coming from a service perspective, I teach services. I think Sterling teaches services too. We both really love this topic a lot. You really want to think about how the characteristics of services are really affecting how we deal with differing conditions and distributions of vulnerability, because we know that services have very special and important challenges. So thinking through more about that nature of vulnerability, is it stigmatized? Is it visible? Can we, when we're thinking about a heterogeneous audience for our services, people coming through the door who are sometimes vulnerable and other times not, or who some are vulnerable and others aren't, how do we customize and provide heterogeneous responses to that mix of people who come in? Next part, we really want to make sure this is a services story. A paper will not get through unless it is a services story. And so you really want to think about, how do services cause the vulnerability? What are those interventions? What are best practices for design and delivery of services for vulnerable consumers who have various types and distributions of customer vulnerability? And, like I said, we really want to be thinking about those unique characteristics of services, the intangibility, heterogeneity, simultaneous production and consumption. Order. Do you mute yourself? Thank you. So we want to really think about how those create special challenges and opportunities for addressing consumer vulnerabilities. Can we design solutions that are going to help us? So I think you can take a lot of different services spins on this topic. You can think about how do recent innovations in service theory and design affect that nature and distribution and understanding of vulnerability. So for example, we can think about all kinds of new innovations in technology that may change the distribution and nature of vulnerability, really making it less for some consumers and more for others. So we really want to be thinking about that dynamic and that relationship. So a lot of what as I said, one of the things that I talk about a lot at conferences, that I work behind the scenes to try to support and endorse, is really that we really need to be taking this on seriously. And we need to be thinking about how we can take on real substantive issues that are pertinent to marketplace stakeholders and academics, and then do something about them. And so, I think a lot of people have always talked about how marketing activities study in contexts. But I want to say some contexts are more important to engage with and study in than others. And we have around us in this audience, and the people who are here, the people who attended the workshop at Frontiers, amazing contexts that are critically important problems. And Sterling was there, so he definitely support that. And so we really want to think about
A me mi ha proprio rimessa a nuovo e adesso che sono 10 giorni che non pratico, ieri mattina mi sono fatta una pratica in casa da sola.
If you are in the audience, and yeah, thank you. So I think we want to really be thinking about what is the potential value of your context for providing theoretical insights, but also what is the value of your context as a context. Neither of those is sufficient of itself. Or, you can't just study and say, a lot of people have this vulnerability. Let me describe it. You really want to be thinking about, where is the bang for services? What's new and different? What conversation are you joining and contributing to? So what theoretical insights are going to be derived from that drive pragmatic action. So I think a lot of you who are doing either big data analysis using modeling, or you're using experiments, or you're using ethnographic or qualitative approaches. All of those can really inform societal grand challenges when we pay attention to the nature of that problem in detail. And so context can really render insights into the most important problems facing the world. And I think we need to think about how can we, in this issue, really commit to finding solutions to understanding and addressing and mitigating vulnerabilities across time, across context, across different kinds of actor entanglements, and using a whole variety of theoretical perspectives. So don't limit yourself, but also don't bring a whole bunch of theories to the table. Bring one or two, build together. But make sure that you're joining a specific conversation, that you're delivering with a context that's meaningful and important, that you're telling us how you can address specifically service design and delivery issues in that space. And the reason I'm emphasizing this is that I know a lot of you are here because your heart is with this topic. That's definitely Ron, that's definitely Sterling, that's definitely me. And so I know that your heart is going to be there. What I want to make sure you also think through is the importance of this being a services story, a story where you're looking at how service design and delivery can be done much better in order to address the profound problems that all of you are studying and working on. So you really want to think through what's your research question, what's the context, what are your substantive and theoretical insights. So write that down on a piece of paper when you get started. When you read through the final draft of your paper, go through your paper again. Is the research question clear? Is it clear why this context is important? Have I provided substantive and theoretical insights around a services story? So think through, how does your context inform your research question and your theoretical and substantive insights? And how does your context inform the nature and boundary conditions for those theoretical and substantive insights? So you begin with one vulnerable population or one vulnerability that is created in the service system. You then want to say, what difference does that make for the broader challenges in services and in vulnerability? So I hope that we'll have a lot of chance to sort of address specifics of this going forward. I want to make sure that you also know how proud you are going to be of yourself when you publish in JSR. I know that Mingwei is very excited about this issue. She told Sterling and me at the Frontiers workshop that she thought this could be the best ever issue, and I think so too. So I want to hand it over back to Ron, who'll be standing in a little bit as Mingwei to tell you what a great journal this is and how excited we are to be in charge of creating the best issue ever of this journal.
So if anybody saw this picture, I'm the little baby reaching out. No, I'm not. I'm the grandfather that you see there. I don't know. I guess he's a lot older now, though. That was like 4 or 5 years ago. So thank you, Linda. It was really wonderful to listen to it. And Linda has a paper out now. This is in JCR. And I have not thought a lot about dirt, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. I don't want to do anything that would spoil it for you. But if you want to see something that is really different in the way in which we think, you should look at that. And the final version of this paper became something that she should be enormously proud of. Okay, so let me talk about JSR and positioning. Roland Russ started this journal not that long ago. I remember when the first issue came out, and I published it in a few times, I guess 4 or 5 times. And they always wanted to be the leading journal in services. And that means it's not just about marketing and consumer behavior. That's the most important thing that I want to tell you. The good news on the stat side is that being multidisciplinary, they're more like a management journal in some respects in terms of their ability to expand knowledge into other spaces that you wouldn't normally think of from marketing. So it's probably, well, we're going to see. Give me the next one, Sterling. Okay, so they've gone through this, and so they're third out of 226 org behavior and human resource management journals. So they do work in that area. Fifth out of 1,415 sociology and political science journals, and 16 in information systems journals. That's kind of interesting. But this should give you an indication that people are looking at this from a wide variety of perspectives. And just because it was started by marketing people doesn't mean it's stayed in that venue. You can move, Sterling. Thank you. Okay. Here's another way of looking at it. It would be, if you looked at it as a marketing journal, it would be second in our field after the Journal of Marketing. Not everybody always feels that way. I remember did a visiting about 10 years ago at University of Maryland College Park, and Roland was suggesting that JSR should be considered among these journals in terms of reputation in the department. It was an uphill battle for him. But the truth is, it's earned the right to be a top-ranked journal, and I think it demonstrates that here. Not to take anything away from the other journals, they just tend to be, except for journal marketing, tend to be much more directed. Next one. Okay, if you, I love word clouds. I actually did this. I did a little study of, believe it or not, and it would make you brain dead, of Donald Trump's tweeting behavior prior to the presidential election. And so you could just imagine what came out there. But at any rate, this is the kind of work that's coming through in that journal. And what you don't see here is as much in the way of marketing. Not that we couldn't talk about marketing in every one of these areas, but it clearly isn't just dominating the journal or marketing, typical marketing issues. I will say, though, I wrote a paper for them that, and Linda knows this work. I wrote 3 papers based on a 4-year ethnography in a maximum security prison. And I was working with these men, and we were talking about services that were delivered to them and the goods and services that were delivered to them, the way in which things occurred in there. And we spent a lot of time talking about it, and we determined that this wasn't service, this was anti-service, built into the culture of the organization, that these men should be deprived as often as they can be. And that was literally part of the way in which they were expected to be treated, even though they were the final consumers of all the goods and services we were talking about. And so I actually went to the journal and looked to see if they had anything on anti-service, and they did, but it was very distinct from the ways in which we had defined it. The reason I bring this up is I didn't want to try to sell them something on a prison, a context of a prison, or that they were vulnerable because they couldn't get the things that they needed to be adequate in whatever that internal society and even the external society in which it existed. I went in and I really tracked down the ways in which anti-service and other kinds of service disruption occurred. And I spent a lot of time thinking about the literature and built the entire front end based on the work that was in JSR. And I think that made the trip through the review process a whole lot better, because the reviewers saw that as grounded in issues that they had found significant enough to publish about. So that goes along with something that Sterling has said and will say, but Linda brought home to all of us. It's got to be embedded in services. Next, Sterling. Okay, so I probably won't do all that for you, but let me just give you my own take on it. They want to be the leading journal in services, and I believe that they are. There's another one in the management field that does pretty well, but this journal is really special. And if you look through it, definitely before you do anything, before you even start writing anything, go through the last 5 years of the journal and just take a look and see what's being done there. Clearly, it's multidisciplinary, which helps us in terms of getting our word out. We can talk about scope and impact. We have a little bit, but I think that more than anything, when I'm looking at JSR now, is they want to push the frontier forward. They're interested in looking at issues that are there, but they want to know where you're moving those issues to. So I think one of the reasons why they like the anti-service work that I did is because it put it in an entirely new context. And I have a paper under review, I guess second round at JCR, that looks at consumer journeys, but it's one of the first pieces, if not the first piece, that talks about an unwanted journey. What happens when consumers are on a journey that they prefer not to be on, and how do they cope with and deal with that? And so I don't know that I feel like it pushes the consumer journey literature forward. The reviewers are going to make that decision. But I think if you take a look at this and you can look at an area and say, we can turn that on its head a little bit so that when the reviewer sees it, they go, huh, that's a different take than I thought before. You're going to do a lot better. They're very open to methods. Okay, I've published qualitative papers in there, and I've never had any problem with somebody saying it's an inappropriate way to look at things. You're going to find that in other journals, but you're not going to find it here. And that's partly because the editor has gone out of her way to make sure that her board has the right people on it to deal with any methodological issue. And to be honest with you, probably I'm probably a reviewer on 10 articles a year out of JSR, and I get a lot of the work that's kind of pushing the envelope. And I've never seen them write back, hey, we don't like the fact that you're doing this, or did you try this? They're very open to it, as long as it's well done. So the final thing I want to say here is that it says it's aimed to be relevant to service stakeholders. That's true. But I don't know that you can get through JSR without having a strong theoretical bent. And I want to yes, they take analytical. I don't do analytical modeling, but they definitely are interested in analytical modeling. In fact, I think they would like to see more of it. The one thing I want to say here, and I want to reiterate something Linda said, and I had this on a paper that I wrote not too long ago where people said, that's not theory, that's references. Do you know what the difference is? That's where I have an idea, and I found a lot of people that have thought about that idea. And I said, well, look, other people have thought about that idea. Well, they want to move theory. And that means that you have to dig deep inside a particular well and to be able to demonstrate that you're within that space. The benefit of that, and this is the last thing I'll say from this slide, the benefit of that is that you can go down a rabbit hole and you don't have to worry about other rabbit holes. But if you start bringing up 3 or 4 theoretical paradigms, people are going to expect you to be able to take a look at those literature bases and say something profound about them. If you think you can say, if you think you can talk about 4 different theoretical bases with real depth and do so within the context of one study, that's a very hard proposition. So I'd be leery of doing that. Sterling? Okay, so I'm going to note this. I'm going to turn it over to Sterling now. We will the way this is going to work is that we've decided we didn't flip a coin. We'd actually pushed the buck to Linda. And so Linda's going to be kind of acting as the editor, is going to kind of moving papers around. That doesn't mean she's going to take on all responsibility. I hope not. She has enough responsibilities elsewhere. But between the 3 of us, we're going to try to divvy up these papers and look at them. Just so that you know, we'll probably go to areas where we have more expertise than others, although there's a lot of overlap with all 3 of us. And we'll stay away from papers that have co-authors or people from our universities or people that we know well, just so that it doesn't look like there's any impropriety going on here. Other than that, we'll probably begin looking at them in the beginning of August and see if we can make something, we can start the process going. Please stay within this window. Given the amount of interest that we have, we're probably going to have a hard deadline of October 1st. I'll be surprised if we don't have enough papers to begin moving forward. So really think it through. I'm going to turn it over to Sterling, my good friend and co-author.
Can I say first?
It's fine with me. It's Sterling's time, not mine.
Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
I just wanted to say about the deadline that I think that there's a genuine interest in publishing any good work that comes through on this topic. So I would encourage you, if you are like really work to make this October deadline, but if you're working on a project and it's not going to make us, please reach out to us because JSR still wants it. JSR still wants your work in this space. And so there's no hard deadline on doing work in this space and sending it to JSR. And so I really want that to be an important way of your thinking about it, because I know that good work in this space takes time. And I just want to say that I put my team when I was at Journal of Consumer Research, we put together a special issue on the future of brands. And we held a conference at Columbia University. Bert Schmidt hosted it for us. And we got over 100 submissions on that issue. And we worked really, really hard to fill that submission at the end. It was really hard to find a set of papers to make that special issue. They're wonderful papers, by the way, so please go read that issue. But it really was a lot of work to make that happen. And what you have seen subsequently is, and I have seen it as editor, is many of those papers that didn't make it through to be part of the special issue made it through and were subsequently published. And so I really want you to have a long-term horizon on your own work in this space. Your own work in this space is not about meeting an October deadline. It's about doing really consequential research on a really consequential topic and putting it in a top journal, JSR. Okay? So, if you have a paper in December on this topic, I want to hear about it. I want to know about it. You've missed the deadline, but we're still interested in your work, okay? Does that make sense, Ron?
That's perfect. Thank you. And I see questions rolling in. Please have them keep rolling in.
Yeah, it absolutely does. A lot of times, those of you who have not done special issues, there are times when you get a good paper and it's just not ready yet for whatever reason, and you keep moving it into the we keep watching the paper, we keep working with the paper, but it moves beyond the special issue. So thank you for clarifying.
And I'll reiterate, because we heard also directly from the editor-in-chief Ming Wei that yes, they are interested in these papers beyond just the special issues. So while the special issue has got the deadline, please work towards that. We'd love to see many papers submitted by October 1. Please continue your work. There's lots of great questions rolling in. I don't want to go back into the previous presentations, but I just want to make an important point, because I see a lot of friends of and a lot of people out here that are familiar with other like-minded journals, like the Journal of Public Policy Marketing, one that Ron was editor of. A lot of you are doing work that certainly is going to speak to policy. Again, we want you to make sure you move beyond just policy to service practice and service managers and service stakeholders. And Ming Wei was really adamant, maybe a little stronger than I would have been, saying that she doesn't want this to be a paper that could be just lifted and put into the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing, which I think it's very clear that we want service-oriented papers that speak to service audiences. I will just share, I've published it in JSR a number of occasions, and those papers are actually read by service industry professionals. And one of the unique things about the Journal of Service Research, and I see maybe some of you even in this audience are service practitioners, and you publish in or are seeking to publish in this outlet. The services area is an area where there is not a divide between academic and practitioner. And therefore, as you write, make sure that you're able to speak to those audiences clearly as well. I see a lot of good questions in. I'm having a hard time following my eyeballs, so I'm gonna throw it out to my co-authors if there's any of these questions. I saw one question came in about the number of studies. We're not JCR. We're not going to count. I'm not just picking on JCR and Linda, the former editor there. I'm not going to say the numbers of studies should. There's not a requirement. If you are doing an in-depth, qualitative study, and that is the study, and that you have really been able to, communicate and clearly articulate the impact of that study, and it's driving, improvements in understanding around this topic, certainly a single study can be suitable. I know Linda and Ron and us also appreciate multiple methods. So if there's opportunity to engage in multiple method research where you build upon your qualitative work with a quantitative study. That's certainly a beautiful exercise, and it certainly speaks to that that question.
Yeah, can I respond to that, Sterling? There's a couple. First of all, we don't require, although I'm submitting some things to psych journals, and they want everything pre-registered, and you should get in the habit of doing that now. So if you're running a bunch of studies, get them pre-registered, because one of the issues has been, and it is true in our field, that people will run 40 studies and show 5. So you want to make sure that you're thoughtful about that. The second thing is, I find a lot of papers coming and they'll say, well, we ran 5 studies. And I'm going, well, why didn't you just run 1 with all those, there was no reason to run 5, but they just feel that they have to have multiple studies. So if you're going to run multiple studies, make sure there's a rationale for why you went from study 1 to study 2 and study 2 to study 3. When somebody comes up to me and they give me a paper and the upfront says, okay, here's what we walked through all this literature and we just, instead of running a study, we ran 5 studies because we know that people want a lot of studies. I don't know that it always makes sense. So be thoughtful about that. I think that's what Sterling is trying to tell you. If you're doing qualitative work, the only thing I would recommend is you don't have to spend 4 years in a space. I mean, I did it 1 time. Other times there were a year or less, but don't tell me that you went to Tanzania for 2 weeks on vacation and you talked to some people and then were able to come up with something that was special. You really have to have time and grade in order to be able to do that. And I agree 100% with Sterling that if you can use multiple methods and they coalesce well together, some of Linda's work with Eric Arnold in particular really spoke to that. And it's that seamless integration of these ideas, because what it happens is if you pull together what you're trying to talk about and the research in this kind of way, it really makes a difference. So thank you.
I think there are quite a few questions here. I do kind of want to speak to this issue of, I think people always say, how much research do I need to do? How much evidence do I have to have? How many studies do I have to say? And there's no way to answer that question. There's no real viable way to answer that question. What you need is a compelling story that you've evidenced in a way that makes it believable and significant to your audience. And sometimes that takes 1 study, and sometimes it takes a lot more than that. I want to emphasize that if you look at the 3 of us, all 3 of us have quite a bit of qualitative work. We all have other kinds of work as well, but all of us do have a fair amount of qualitative work. That does not mean that we do not urgently want other kinds of methodologies. If you're doing analytical modeling, send it our way for sure. We will be using AEs. Journal Services Research has a lot of good AEs. One of the reasons that I am point person is because I'm on the advisory board for the journal, but I've never actually published in the journal. But I have a good network of really multidisciplinary people from being an editor of a very multidisciplinary journal that we can draw on, and that Ming Wei will help me coordinate to do. And so I think I want you to understand that we will find the very best person to manage your manuscript, whatever method it comes in with. And I think that there's a lot of room to bring new methods to our journal, but you want to be careful about that, because you're still going to have to persuade us that what you've got is rigorous in the way that you've collected and analyzed the data. And I think, I would actually disagree a little bit with Ron. I think that we're going to be going toward a situation where we're re-registering more studies than previously. But I still think that I hope JCR doesn't go there. We had a lot of discussions about it. I think you should pre-register only that study that nails it. But be free to explore around the frontiers of it otherwise. But then you have to show that it's not only compelling, but you're showing us the real story that came out of the data that you have. And that's true whether it's experimental, whether it's analytical modeling or if it's qualitative.
Just along those lines, a question just rolled in. It is not a requirement currently at the Journal of Service Research to pre-register. So if you have studies that you've completed that were not pre-registered, you're still able, but I think the recommendation is valid. Going forward, this is going to become more and more the expectation across.
But I think there's still a case to be made that a compelling story is not about pre-registering.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let me clarify that. I agree with you 100%, Linda. All I'm saying is we're entering domains now with our work where they won't even look at your paper unless it was pre-registered. The studies are pre-registered. I recognize the downside of that too. I'm just saying you need to consider those things because if you don't make it here, you're going to try to make it someplace else, and they may have different rules.
But I will tell you that if you do 50 experimental studies, which is unfortunately not unusual, I have not done that myself, but I know a lot of people who have. Once you figure it out, a lot of that is wasted on figuring it out. But once you figure it out, then you can pre-register that key study. If you have to go somewhere else, you can pre-register it and redo it then. And so I think a lot of it is trying to figure out how you can not spend so much time just wandering around trying to figure it out by running studies, but instead embedding yourself in that contextual problem that you're facing and really trying to understand what's going on before you start to do study. And that's why I think a really thinking through your context and what it informs and how it informs it and what the relationships are in that context is critical, whatever kind of work you're doing. So if you're doing experimental work on repair, for example, you can save yourself a lot of experimental studies if you actually go look at it, go watch how it's done, go talk to people who are doing it. So I am very much, before I was a qualitative researcher, I was a closet qualitative researcher. I think there's a lot to be said for really learning and knowing about your context and the richness of that context, and then making sure that you're telling a compelling story with that in mind. And I think that's true for modeling as well. The best modelers are modelers who really are trying to understand a problem, and they brought a lot of insights to those problems, and they're not just hunting around in the data.
I think those who have heard me present know that I'm a closet comedian, but let me just say here that in terms of this research, one of the things that I found with qualitative research, and I get a lot of it because the journals we're with view me as a qualitative researcher, which I don't know if I like that moniker or not, but I get the usual, 10 references and just give me a laundry list of references that say qualitative research is good and tell me very little about what they actually did. So that's my biggest concern. If you're going to do qualitative work, I need to get a sense of what it was like to be there. I will get a sense of exactly what you did. You can't just tell me, oh, we did interviews. You can't just tell me we did participant observation or non-participant observation. It's got to be clarified what you did. And I don't care if you get 1,000 pages. Some people just give a laundry list. We did lots of interviews and have 1,000 pages. And that means it's really, there was a lot of depth there. It really doesn't describe that. So think through how you present so that we get a good sense of what you've done. And I think that will be important. Yeah, we will look at conceptual articles as well. Just make quick on that.
Yeah, thank you for jumping on that one, Ron. Also, I saw a question come out regarding a specific type of a method called participatory action. I've seen actually reviewed papers using participatory action methodologies, and you are welcome. Yeah, again, these are all in a vein and of important methods that are open at the journal. So again, you just have to build a strong reasoning and justification for what you're doing and just make sure it's very clear to the reader. I want to also just chime in because something came up as a question in the workshop we had previously at this Frontiers in Service conference that I think was a really important conversation. And it harkens back to one of the earlier questions regarding how we define vulnerability. And really we're very open to all different sources of vulnerability. And that's really important for you to consider, but you're going to need to make sure that you describe to us or define for us what you're referring to when you speak of vulnerable and disadvantaged. The other part of this special issue is the word consumer. And we don't want that to be a problematic word, because some of you are doing work in B2B or looking at, business relationships, not just end user consumer relationships or consumer activity and behavior. We're open. In fact, the Journal of Service Research does some fantastic work looking at the ecosystem, the network of service actors. And so looking at vulnerability within a supply chain, within a perspective of delivery, that is certainly open. And it doesn't exclude work that could also be done on employees. Some of you are coming from an HR lens. We had a number of folks that asked, is it okay for us to speak also from the service provider perspective? Absolutely. Right. And really what we're interested in is vulnerability and disadvantaged human beings. And so if, just make sure that you bring this in the context of how this fits within the service system and the service actors that you're wanting to speak about. Is that fair, Ron and Linda, to kind of offer that?
I think that's great advice. It's really terrific advice. Thank you, Sterling.
So there was a question about the transferability of your results to other settings. And I do want to emphasize that, Ron said, we want to know what you studied. And with qualitative research, but with other kinds of research as well, there's always this problem of the difference between the forest and the trees. And in experimental work, you're always trying to take a big construct and then operationalize it with this very specific measure. And I think that in qualitative research and in modeling research, you have all kinds of data, and you're trying to figure out what the patterns are of that data. In each and every case, we're interested in something that you can say that's going to be meaningful in an important, that has some kind of transferability in terms of this could be used for other kinds of service design. This informs service design specifically, and as well that it has substantive transferability in some ways. The reason I say this is because at the Frontiers in Services Conference, somebody was studying a very kind of specific vulnerability that they cared a lot about. And I think that's wonderful. But I think you want to really say, what do we understand differently about vulnerabilities? Because we're studying this particular case of vulnerability. Or what do we learn about how service design functions in a service space with distributed vulnerability from studying this case? So you want to think about what kind of a case of vulnerability is it? What kind of a case of service design problem is it? And that should give you some kind of transferability to other contexts and other settings. So you don't have to, I said, and I believe that we should study really important contexts, and we should do studies in those contexts. But those should provide broader understandings about vulnerability and about service design and delivery. I don't know if that helps clarify, but I don't want a study about how people with moles on their face feel discriminated about in a service setting, and we should do something about it.
But having said that, and I agree with you, so I'm just going to agree with you, but I know that, people are also talking from interesting perspectives, like what happens when there's one person who's looking at a paper that's looking at issues of mental illness, and they were wondering whether or not people who struggle with mental difficulties, first of all, that they're very, very different. So there are lots and lots of categories of this, just like there is for vulnerability and as there is for disability. But they also were talking about, do services actually help relieve those problems, or can services also exacerbate those problems? So they're trying to take a kind of a holistic look around a particular topic, embedded within the idea that services can go both ways. And I think traditionally someone would have come in and said, okay, there are services that support people who struggle emotionally or mentally, but not think about the other side of that. So So take the time to really think around the entire issue. It might be helpful.
All great insights. And again, keep the questions rolling in. We're only as good as the questions you ask. I thought I've been combing through here. So there was a question. I'll throw it over to Ron. And not a good example of a qualitative paper. I could actually ship off plenty of those to this group. But is there any specific examples or guiding guidelines that you would say on how to write up a qualitative paper?
So we probably all could do this, but for me, I really start with the story that I'm trying to tell. And I try to go in as naively as I can to a situation. So it isn't as if I start writing up the what I believe to be the focus. And then I think about who I'm trying to give voice to, because that's the most important thing to me, is who am I trying to give voice to. And then when I go in and I'm beginning to collect data and I'm going through the data collection process, I begin fine-tuning what I'm doing. But what I try to do first and foremost is tell the story. What is the story that I'm going to be telling people, when all is said and done? Because a lot of this work is done by trying to see what story you're trying to tell and what theory informs that story as it becomes more apparent to you. There's some really good storytellers in our field. I mean, I think John Scouten he's a beautiful writer, a beautiful storyteller. I think John Sherry tells a beautiful story. I think this paper that Linda has coming out, I don't know that I've seen the final version, but it just tells a very interesting story. You know what I like about that paper, and some of the work that John have done is, so I can feel myself embedded in it. I can feel myself in that story. As I'm reading along, it's like it reminds me of reading a very, very good novel about something that's important. And so I try to think about, what if I have an audience reading this, what story is it telling? When I tried to write a paper about abortion many years ago, almost 30 years ago now, the first thing I went to were a group of women that had shared with me that they had gone through an abortion experience, either decide to have one or decide not to have one, but had shared it with me in the past. And I said to them, how does this story resonate with you? When I was in the prison, all of the men, when we worked together, but I came up with writing the story that I wanted to tell, I had them look at it and tell me, is this a story that you feel that you've experienced? And I think you're reading it. So don't be afraid to do some of that.
There are really excellent papers in Journal of Marketing that use qualitative data and that do a really compelling job of telling a story. There's a listed on the JCR website. There's a whole list of sort of papers in that qualitative space. JAMS has published some very nice papers, including Pip's paper. That's, I think, it still isn't actually, it's advanced access, right? Still. But so there's really, really good work out there that you can use as templates. I want to underscore that how I do research and how Ron does research and how Sterling does research and how many other people here do qualitative research. And our approaches can all be really different and they can still be highly valuable. So one of my very favorite JMs of recent note that appeared in the Better Marketing for a Better World special issue was How Do I Carry All of This Now? And it had a sort of a quasi-experimental feel to it. They were really looking at the elimination of plastic bags in Brazil, in Chile. Anyway, when you can no longer use plastic bags. And they were looking at actually how the vulnerability of that is distributed differently, depending upon whether you have transportation, you have a car, depending upon what your specific circumstances are, there's more or less hardship associated with that policy change. And so that's a very different kind of research than maybe some other qualitative projects. They look at a specific intervention that happens as a result of a policy or a specific intervention that happens as a result of a service design. And then they look at how that vulnerability is distributed as a function of what that intervention is. So I think there are lots and lots of ways to approach your design, and all of them can work. You just have to make sure you're iterating between your research question and your evidence, and what theoretical and substantive insights you're providing, and the evidence that does that. And so you can do that however many times in whatever direction you want, but those have to come together. You have to have a research question that points to what's the question, what's the problem I'm trying to address, what's the theoretical conversation that I'm trying to join, and what is the evidence that provides the answer.
Very good. Thank you, Linda. Not to take us down a different vein of topics again, but another great question regarding, and I think I opened up this this possibility that questions would come in regarding organizational front lines research. Many of you are familiar with the organizational front lines work. It's been interesting as I participated with this group. There, you know, again, it maybe took a global pandemic for this group to really have a market shock upon them to be able to say, how does the front lines deal with vulnerability? I personally have papers looking at nurses and healthcare providers and looking at the vulnerability and challenges that are there. But also, I think what's really important is how does this transfer to their patient, their end user? How does this transfer to the system? You know, so making those connections of how does the front line, yes, how do they experience challenges, but how does this also impact their consumer, their customer? Any other thoughts, Ron or Linda, as we talk about rolling into other work that might be involving employees or other types of consumers?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because I think something Linda said is real important, is that we look at both sides of this too. So don't feel you have to only talk about the consumer side of something. Please talk about the service delivery person as well. I'm in a case with the Attorney General of DC looking at Amazon and their workforce and the ways in which these people are being paid and not being paid properly. And it's really compelling to think about those that are actually delivering things for Amazon and what their relationship to the company is like.
And to Christiana, on your comment, I would invite you. I was part of an editorial at the Journal of Service Research that looked at the market shocks around the pandemic. And again, we're not necessarily asking for a ton of COVID papers, but I think if you look at the particular editorial, my co-authors and I, we talk about the front lines and OFR impacts and how it impacts, you know, you and I as consumers to a healthcare system, how vulnerability is transferred from that deliverer to the actual end user. And so maybe that would be helpful to take a look at that editorial as you look at frontlines work. And there's been dedicated issues in the Journal of Service Research on organizational frontlines, and in that issue, there's also some papers that look at vulnerability at the front lines. So, you know, another important piece that we haven't talked about in here is the role that technology plays. You know, something that we're very interested in the Journal of Service Research is the evolving nature of technologies, and that again, one of the comments that Ron and Ming-Wei have shared about artificial intelligence, other types of technology that are enabling, mobilizing, delivering services. We are very interested in vulnerability as it is, you know, mitigated as well as exacerbated through technology.
Let me emphasize once again, Holgar's comment. We are happy to transition something to the regular issue, either because it doesn't make our special issue deadline for some reason. It doesn't get turned around quickly enough to get in the special issue, but also if it's a good fit with services, but doesn't feel like a good fit for our issue. That's Ming-Wei and I are very much on the same page on this, that we're going to be working to make sure that any paper that comes in that is a good paper gets a shot at JSR.
Other questions? I want to make sure I'm going through the chat, but feel free to unmute. We're at a portion if you feel like you would like to mute and ask a question, or raise your hand. We can look for the icon there, or continue with chat. We just want to make sure we give you ample time to answer questions. I know one of the comments that came to me privately is whether this is recorded. As you saw at the top, this is recorded. And in there, you'll have the slides that we presented. We kept that brief because we wanted to really make this workshop, this time together, more about fielding and answering any questions.
Yeah, I'll just add one other thing. This will be a final comment. We probably are going to get too many submissions for us to review your paper and then send you back some, real responses to it. I tended to do that previously. I mean, we can probably take the abstract and tell you whether or not we think that it's directed towards the right topical area, but we won't be able to review full papers because it's just not going to be possible. We're all also on 5 editorial boards and doing our own research, et cetera. So we can't do that, but we can probably tell you whether it would fit. And, trust the process. If you fit and it's reasonably well done, we want to send it out for review. So we're hoping not to, Linda and I and Sterling all dislike desk rejecting papers because it doesn't build our field very well. I know some editors feel that it's important to do, and I understand why they do it, but we're going to try not to do that. So unless it's really off target, you're going to get reviews back. And if the worst thing that happens is you get some good feedback, at least that'll move you forward. But we're hopeful, and we have no preconceived notions about who ought to be publishing in this journal and what the work ought to be. So thank you.
I just want to clarify, we might have a little bit of a different perspective on some pieces of this. It is very clear that JSR's goal is to publish papers, not reject them. So in that sense, our goal is to publish papers, not reject them. That said, the truth of the matter is that the rejection rate at JSR is very high. Only a few papers get through. And I know from my own experience that many people will send in a half-baked idea with half-baked evidence to this issue, partly because of the deadline and partly because the video is shot, and partly because they haven't checked with other peers, with other friendly but critical readers. And that's going to get desk rejected, you guys. If it has a good merit, we'll try to do that with a constructive reviewer so that you get a good review on what to do next with it. But the reality is, anytime you send your work to a top journal in the field, you can expect that it has to be really good or it's not going to make it through.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that we would take weak papers. What I meant to imply was our goal is to publish papers. Our goal is to give you an opportunity. But that's absolutely true. If you send us a half-baked or half-completed idea, we can't waste the reviewer's time on that. So please take the time. And I think Linda's advice is very important. Send it to somebody who can give you a constructive feedback and see if that'll help you move it along. And you've got several months, so you should have the time to do it unless you're just beginning your work now.
All right, questions continue to roll in. Question regarding methodology of collecting data at the bottom of the pyramid. I'm going to lean on Ron on this. We have a question that getting quality data sometimes from individuals that maybe are at the bottom of the strata and spectrum of maybe education, that there's hard to get maybe the type of richness of data. Any thoughts? I mean, obviously you've interviewed a lot of different types of people.
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a lot of data that's for free from, the World Bank, the United Nations, the World Health Organization. So world value surveys. So, make sure you're looking around at places that go into those environments. But the other part too, if you're immersed and can get into those environments, make sure you do it right. So a lot of times I see people saying, well, I went for the poorest people in this particular zip code, or I used panel data and I said we want people who make below X amount of money. And I actually wrote something in marketing letters that said, yeah, but that group that you said was low income doesn't compare to people in a real, truly low income community. So it takes a certain amount of finesse to do that, and it typically can't be done on a moment's notice. So the first thing is you need to identify where the people are that you want to give voice to. The second thing you need to do is you need to figure out how to get into those communities. And almost invariably, when I went into the communities where people were impoverished, and they tend to be people more likely to be people of color than not, I had to take the time to go in and earn their trust and respect before I did any kind of data collection. I tried to find a role that allowed me to come in and show that I'm supporting them. The other part too is what I said was we want to figure out who to give voice to, use this as a way to give them voice, and then use that voice to make their worlds a better place. If you can connect those dots for people, they're much more likely to be cooperative for you. But don't think you can shortcut it. If you want a shortcut going in and talking to people who are truly at the bottom of the pyramid, no matter what country or continent you're on, it's just plain and simply not going to work.
Yeah, can I say one other thing? I mean, there's a lot of people who are doing really good work in this space that's qualitative, so go read their work. But one other thing is when you put that word obtain good answers, be careful about what assumptions you're bringing to what constitutes a good answer. That in particular, what Ron said, and I'll highlight it again, is you're trying to give voice to them. Respect that voice, however that voice comes through. That's a good voice. And so the idea that you want a good answer is kind of like, I want a good experiment, as in it showed what I wanted it to show. But neither of those is a good way to approach research. Giving voice to your informant is the most important part, and whatever voice they have, you should respect.
And I'll add to that, there are times when, so I was in an African American community in North Philadelphia. Most of the men and women were working with people that got out of prison after long bids. And it took me a year of working with them before we could talk about race honestly. So if you're finding that people are really reticent to talk, it's because they don't have the trust yet. And you can't rush trust. You're going to have to do it. I was working with the US Census Bureau, and they were trying to figure out, oh, we want to use ethnography. We're going to go in and meet some people. We're going to send them out into the field. And I went, okay, back up. You've got 2 years to figure this out, or you got 6 years to figure this out. Take a step back and really think about how you get into a community. Hillary sent a note about arts-based. I know that, Hillary, I know that you have done arts-based work. I'm really proud of the work that you've done. I know that you've worked with John Sherry and John Scouten, who are poets. Of course, they're great writers, so they're poets as well. You know, I think it'd be really interesting to see somebody do something unique like that. I have no way of helping you be able to do that, but don't shy away from something that's different just because it hasn't had a lot of press yet. Of course, you're going to have to find something profound to make it work, but I'm all for going into communities differently.
Great question came regarding, and this is I wish Roland Rust was on here, and he would have offered some really interesting insights at the Journal of Service Research regarding titles and how descriptive titles need to be. Because I'm also an AE and reviewer, I do read and am attracted to titles that really hook me, right? And a colon does not hook me per se, right? Or an antecedents and consequences, the colon. And so, really, I would say bring out, the question about rather context, because we have said context matters. Having a reference to context in your title it may be appropriate, but again, just has been iterated. Really, how is your paper pushing frontiers, theoretically and in practice? And that needs to come out clearly. And I would go beyond just the title. Right? Spend time writing your abstract. Some of the best advice I received from Roland Rust as I was an early researcher was to write your title, write your abstract before you write your paper. And don't just write your abstract, your title on the back end, right? Really think about at the beginning, what is that contribution statement, which I know at the Journal of Consumer Research and other journals, they're bringing back that contribution statement, right? Really, what does it boil down to? If you can't tell me in 1 or 2 sentences what your paper is about and how it's going to hook me, the reader, then you haven't got your contribution statement. You know, that so what factor that Linda talked about.
Yeah, I have to say, if Sarah Mady's on the line, she's a co-author of mine. We have a paper, and I thought a lot about this title, but it was a wider shade of pale. And people don't know that song, but it's from Cream. It's one of my favorite songs. And we were looking at women in 3 different continents. 3 different continents, I think that's true, Sarah, who were using whitening products because being darker was not preferred by the men around. This is all women, men around them, sometimes their parents and grandparents, sometimes society in totality. It was a little tongue-in-cheek. I've tried tongue-in-cheek. I tried to write a paper about marijuana that said 1 toke over the line. And some people liked it and some people didn't. But I think, you know, we don't want to get too kitschy with our titles either. We need to know what you're talking about. So, you know, if you can come up with something, it's not HBR. We're trying to come up with something clever every time we write a paper. But think about what it is you want to say. And I agree, whenever anybody wants to work with me and we have a particular idea in mind, I say, okay, let's work on a title and let's work on the abstract before we move forward. And that may help. You're right, Roland. Roland does tell people that. I follow it too, Sterling.
We've got
I
a
have been on every issue, every side of this issue on titles. And I will also tell you that at least at the beginning, you really want that title that describes what it is that you're doing and contributing, what conversation you're joining and contributing to around this special issue topic. The paper that Ron was flagging is now available in advance access on JCR. And it didn't have a final title until it was final.
You give me the final title, Linda.
What, will I give it to you?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't even remember it now. But I will tell you that we went around and around and around and around on every single rewrite amongst ourselves, and then every single revision with the editors and reviewers. So it's not, the title is not going to happen until the end. And I have cases where, you know, the editor weighed in really heavily that it had to be the theoretical conversation and it couldn't be about the context.
Yes.
And I've had other editors who've weighed in and said, I want to see something more about what the context is, because the context also has really substantive importance. So I think it really depends on your context. Oh, someone's putting it in there. Yeah, consumer dirt work. So the construct is dirt work, and it has a colon, which Raj doesn't necessarily like, but it tells you something about the context because it tells you that it's going to be in extraordinary consumption context. And then it tells you what we're going to contribute, which is we're going to show you what the usefulness of dirt is.
Which just in and of itself, Linda, though, when you look, I've seen a couple of titles.
Be helpful on this.
Yeah, but you know, it was great to see it because people are going to look at that title and they're going to want to read it. They're going to at least look at it.
I hope so.
Oh,
I'm really proud of it that way.
Linda, you were also saying about ChatGPT. Go and make that come out clear.
Oh, I think ChatGPT can be helpful with this. So while I hate ChatGPT, this is a comment from Polanski. I know quite a few people who would never use ChatGPT to write their paper, but who in fact do see what ChatGPT can tell them about titles. So I think you don't want to let it dictate anything, but yeah, let it weigh in, see what it thinks is a good title.
We have a hand raised, Varala. Forgive me on the pronunciation. Please go with your question.
Yeah, that's correct. Hi, everyone, and thanks for responding to my previous question about transferability, Linda. So you might have remembered me from talking to you about this earlier, but Mario's on the call somewhere, are working on a project on transgender consumers in the marketplace. And at the moment, our sample is based on UK consumers. And the type of vulnerability that transgender consumers face will vary based on the rights and legislation in their respective countries. So, oh yeah,
I'm
you
really
wanted to
glad
say
you
something?
asked that clarifying question. I'm not interested in population generalizability at all. Most of us don't do that. Most of us can't do that. I'm not interested in, do people who are sampled in Portugal, are they the same or different than people sampled in the US? I'm interested in what can we learn from people that we sample in Portugal about an important problem. And the specifics of that context are going to inform what we find for sure. And so the specifics of the context and the transgender space is a very, very good example of that. There's so much diversity of how services are designed and how they're provided. And the UK is an example I'm highly familiar with. And so I think we need to understand lots of different contexts and what kinds of vulnerabilities they mitigate or exacerbate.
Right.
And so
I'm sorry.
when I talk about transferability, I'm really talking about theoretical transferability.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that because I reviewed a paper yesterday for one of our top journals, and their look at gender reminded me of something that occurred certainly no later than the 1990s. You know, I guess I won't talk about it because hopefully it's not the person here. But the point is, we have so far to come on issues of gender. Look at the next couple of generations that are coming up and the ways in which they relate to gender. It has almost nothing to do with the way in which we think about gender from the baby boomers perspective or even Gen X perspective. This is going to be territory that we really need to explore. And there was a special issue of Journal of Consumer Affairs when I was the editor. Martina, she's here, isn't she? Or she was. Martina. Anyway, they put something together that I thought was very, very powerful. And I said, really push the edges of this. So it's looking at the ways in which gender plays out in a service environment and the ways in which gender is shifting and changing and molding over time, and how service providers, and I think business organizations in general, hell, my university, you know, still has no way of being able to capture how gender plays out in the workforce. So I'd be excited to see it.
Yeah, Varela, and we got so excited as you started your question. Is there any other question beyond that we didn't get to?
I know, I mean, specifically, we had the opportunity to kind of sample people from the US and the UK, but we found this quite incomparable because even different states in the US will all have different transgender inclusion allowances and stuff. So we decided to stick to the UK. And it sounds like as long as we kind of build an in-depth story about that, it sounds like something you would be on board with. So I think we'll do that.
You know, think about the boundary conditions of what you're doing. And those are really important for us to understand in this context in terms of service design and delivery.
Well,
So-
that's really powerful comment, Linda. Please hope everybody listens to that. You know, I got a paper the other day to review. I'm sorry, I keep talking about the work I do, but you know, they picked Iceland and England and, you know, South Korea, and I'm going, okay, why? Why those three countries? Well, someone was in South Korea, someone was in Iceland, and someone was over here. You know, that doesn't make for good science necessarily. You have to tell me why you're in particular spaces. Now, we know that a lot of our work comes out of the United States and Western Europe, and they talk about, you know, adult white men who are relatively affluent. So we know that that has been an enormous problem with our field. So if you go to Africa or you go to parts of Asia or South Asia, you know, maybe you can say, well, look, these are unexplored places. But don't just think because you have a group of co-authors from all over the world that you can just pull together research from those different places. It may work, but there needs to be a rationale for why.
Thank you.
I know there was another important question that came out regarding the global nature of this audience and other audiences that we've fielded as we've been working towards a special issue. While the three of us don't look like that we are globally representative, I know all of us are co-authored with folks in different countries, in different locales. We're very, very interested in global perspectives. Does it mean that we can necessarily be lenient? We will be open, very open to your work in terms of whether you're in an area that is maybe experiencing disadvantage and vulnerability because of political or economic situations. But we do encourage you, obviously, to submit your very finest work, regardless, right? Whether that requires maybe getting a friendly reviewer, maybe someone from that maybe in this audience, maybe somebody that has a strong proficiency in the English language, whatever it might be, right? There's lots of services, lots of tools, lots of technology to help you. One of my favorite applications of ChatGPT is to use it as a proofreader and to help with language correction, grammar, so forth. But yes, we are very open to all different global corners of this earth. And the journal is very proud, and Ming Wei, as an international scholar herself, is very proud that this journal is not just a US journal. In fact, it's more so an international journal than a US journal. And so please know that we are very open to different perspectives. But the performance is on you to make it coherent, understandable, and so spend some time. And again, you don't have to go to exorbitant amount of resources. You can utilize good proofreading and AI to help make sure that you're able to communicate as clearly as you need to for the journal submission. Ron, Linda, is that fair and accurate? Anything that you want to speak?
Oh, no, Sterling, that's great. And Linda, you and Sterling even given me lots of good ideas. So I'm just real appreciative of this. But one thing about global, I have to say though, I looked at JCR through its history when it was having, its 40th anniversary came about, and there's virtually nothing from Africa. We have continents that have almost zero representation. And although everybody says they're open to all these different areas and fields and methods, it doesn't show up in the final result. So, if you can come to us from a part of the world that has not been really investigated very much and show us that there's some distinctions in the way in which services either operate or people respond to, that could be a very powerful opportunity. And I would look on it favorably. It doesn't mean it doesn't have to be great. It has to be very, very high quality research, but we're very open to it.
All right. We're about at the 90-minute mark. We do have still some time if you have further questions. There's still 101 of you hanging on. Hopefully this has been valuable. Thanks for sticking with us. I know that these questions may not be your question, but are probably helpful. So don't be afraid to ask your individualized questions. Others are able to benefit.
Yeah, and I'll say what I say at the end of almost all my classes. I'm feeling the love in the room. And so maybe it's time for us to end our conversation.
Yeah. All right, we're going to give a final word. Let's give a final word to Linda and Ron. I will
someone said they want the PowerPoint. Look, I'm really as open as I can possibly be. You probably know that if you've been around me before. I'm open as I possibly can be to good work. And we'll do everything in our power to treat you with as much respect as we can and your work with as much respect as we can. I've written with Sterling, I've worked with Linda in a couple of cases, and I can guarantee you that they have the same perspective.
Amen. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you, Ron. Linda, any final words before we close?
I wanted to make sure everybody knows that we did take this, and we also have the PowerPoint, and I've been sending out the PowerPoint to whoever asked for it. So reach out to Sterling or Ron or myself if you cannot find it, but we're going to post it.
In fact, hang on just a second. Don't ever get jumping off.
Oh, yeah. Put it in the
I'm gonna put in chat right now. And let me just quickly get it into a form that's actually small enough to put it on chat. So hang on with me.
I'm going to stop the recording too.
Yeah, that's great. It doesn't seem to want to stop recording.